Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this, my 53rd podcast and number 14 in my second season. I am so happy that you are joining me for this great conversation. Well, this is a first in my podcasting experience. Today I'm giving you the first part of a two-part conversation I had with Greg Bimm, the director of bands at Marian Catholic High School in Chicago Heights, Illinois. I purposefully waited to speak with Greg until after the COVID crisis was mostly past, because I wanted to talk about band with him and not coping strategies that he was using during the time of remote learning. You know, anybody that knows Greg realizes a few things about him. First off, the guy is a true gentleman. He loves people, and I think he might love band as much, or maybe even a little bit more. He's developed a nationally acclaimed program at Marian Catholic, and although his marching bands get high visibility because of their participation in Music for All and other state and regional events, I believe his concert band program is as strong or even stronger. And he does all of this with a limited staff and without an organized feeder program. Marian Catholic is a standalone high school in south suburban Chicago, where the median family income is below state and national norms. But despite that, Greg took root there 44 years ago, and there is no end in sight. I know you're going to enjoy part one of my conversation with Greg Bimm, and I'll bring it to you right after this.
This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning, and a proud sponsor of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Listen to what we've been working on in this clip from our podcast. I wanted to talk about something a little different today. If you only know me from the podcasting store, then you're only getting part of the story. The podcasting store is our electronics and broadcast equipment part of the company, but the other company that we have is Boomer Music Company here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And as part of what we do with that, which is all band and orchestra, I've been volunteering lately at a middle school with their beginners and saw that there was a really big need for reinforcing the basic lessons. So over on the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel, we have created a series of absolute beginners videos. These are short videos that reinforce what the beginner has already learned in class, but may not have fully absorbed. And the goal is to minimize lost practice time between classes so the player can maintain enthusiasm and learn faster. And so the first couple of lessons are going to involve things like opening the case, assembling the instrument, lubrication, and stuff like that. So we're adding more videos to that series all the time, but this could be a valuable resource for those of you who are teaching beginners. So go to the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel. Please subscribe, of course, and check that out. And if that could be of value to you, please use them in whatever way you see fit. Please visit thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning. This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com. Now back to Charlie.
This next gentleman he's a legend in band directing, and I mean that with all honesty and sincerity. If you've been a high school band director, a college band director, a middle school band director, and you don't know about our next guest, then you've been living under a rock. He's known nationally for a lot of things, but the one thing that maybe people don't know about him is what a great human being he is, and what a great teacher he is, and a great musician he is, and a great person he is. And I've had the chance to know him or know about him for many, many years. He's a legend in my mind. I just think he's one of the great people in our profession, and I'm just honored to have him with me. And that's my buddy, Greg Bimm, the director of bands at Marian Catholic High School. Greg, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. You're already too kind.
No. It's the absolute truth. I mean, when I was in Chicago for all those 23 years and before, but especially when I was in Chicago, I mean, it's like we talk about band directors, and one of the first names that always came up was Greg Bimm. So you were held in highest esteem by your colleagues, and there is no finer praise that anyone can heap on you, buddy, and when your colleagues respect you and praise your work. So thanks a million. And like you said, you've been at Marian now for 44 years. You told me before we got online, 44 years. And yep. I know Marian's known and respected coast to coast. But I don't think a lot of people maybe know about Greg Bimm before the Marian days. So tell us where you grew up and how you got started playing in band.
Well, I grew up in a town in the middle of Illinois, actually, about midway across Route 80. So it's halfway between Chicago and the Quad Cities, LaSalle, Peru, Illinois. And as luck would have it, the years that I was there, especially the band program, was extraordinary. It was really, really a fine program, listed in the Sudler list of outstanding programs from the 60s. The real story started, though. My grandfather was a trumpet player, not a professional. He was actually a jack of all trades in a little town, Wynette, Illinois, but he played the trumpet. And then my dad played the trumpet. And so it was sort of preordained that was what I was going to do. But, by the time I got to fifth grade, that's what I wanted to do. It was one of those things where you just look at it and go like, I think I want to follow in these footsteps. And so I started in fifth grade, and my dad was a real big part of that. He was, he was really special, but his deal with me as a little fifth grader was, when you start practicing, or if you're going to start this, you're going to do it right. And in our family, doing it right means you're going to practice an hour and a half a day. And I'm thinking, now I'm looking at it being, the old guy going, you're telling a little fifth grader that he's going to practice an hour and a half every day. But that's what we did. And the way that it worked, instead of having me just sit by a music stand by myself, my dad practiced with me every day. And thinking back now, he worked incredible hours as a TV repairman. He was one of those guys that did house calls. And so he worked 9 to 9 on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And he worked 9 to 6 on Wednesday and Saturday. The only day that he had completely free was Sunday. Well, in the process, when he had those long days, the 12-hour days, he had a half an hour to have dinner at home, 4:30 to 5. And so every day at 4:30, I would practice with my dad while he'd be having dinner. We'd practice together, and he'd guide me through practice. And then he'd go back to work. He'd come home at 9 o'clock, and we'd practice for an hour from 9 to 10. And back then, I'm a little guy, and there were times when I didn't want to practice because I'm just, a fifth grader. Now I look back at it and think, my dad was working 12 hours a day, and he still found an extra hour and a half to spend with me. And so it was sort of a natural thing that I was going to be successful, because you put that kind of time in and you're going to be able to play. I remember my grade school band director was a guy named Larry Katz. He was a trumpet player, and I had him for, I think, my first 2 years. And my first lesson, I went in, and we had a lesson plan back then. You had to write how much practice time you put in each day. And so my mom wrote 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 for every day for the 7 days. And I walked into the practice room, and Mr. Katz said, "Oh, Greg, this is not going to work out. Practicing 1.5 minutes a day is just not going to be, that's not going to be enough." And I said, "Oh no, that's an hour and a half." And I just remember this big grin. And from then on, I was on his team. Like, he was very much a strong backer for me. And so I immediately wanted to be a band director. Like I remember in fifth grade, that was it was like my life decision. That's what I wanted to do. But more so as to the school background, I went on to high school, and at high school, I really had an incredible experience. The band was great. And it had a feeling that I remember the feeling that we could play and do anything that we decided we were going to do. Something about it just said, this is a special place at a special time. And all of the things that surround us in this band are special. And I'm sure that Chris Iso had a part to do that. But there were two band directors when I went to high school. One was Christopher Iso, who is, quite the legend and had an incredible career. Went to Ithaca under Walter Beeler and played in a woodwind quintet with Arnold Gabriel when they were in college together. And so, but he was a wonderful band director, incredibly talented, very much old school Italian Ravelli-like in that rehearsals could be more than mildly tense, but the band could play, and people were. It was a very musical band. The other director was a guy named Melvin Pontius, and Mr. Pontius went on he stayed on at LP after Mr. Iso left for 10 years, and then went to Bradley for a little while, and then went to Wisconsin. And he's still, from what I understand, is still doing some research in music education and still doing clinics, even though I think if he's not 90, he's very close to 90, and he's still active. And the thing about Mr. Pontius was he was a fine musician too, trombone player, but he was brilliant. Yeah, I mean, he was just very much and very much an academic. And so I had two band directors in high school, both incredibly talented and intelligent. Mr. Iso was much more a raw Italian emotional musician kind of guy. And Mr. Pontius was much more the academician, like really, I guess that's the best way to describe him. And so I saw the best of both worlds, I think. And so my experience was incredible. I just remember playing wonderful stuff. There were a lot of transcriptions that we played back then, but we were always playing very challenging literature and playing it at a real high level. And so I had a great experience, which just sort of set me up to, just keep pumping the gas into the feeling that I wanted to be a band director. The more we played, the more I wanted to be a band director. Never wanted to be a professional trumpet player. Never, though I did play along with Blood, Sweat, and Tears and stuff, but my real goal was always to be a band director.
So you wanted to be a band director in fifth grade, and then so you got this vision in your mind, and you had gone to this incredible high school band program. So as you look back, how did that experience in high school help to shape your vision for when you became a high school band director? I mean, what were those traits, those benchmarks that you said, man, I'm going to make sure we do this?
I think in truth, my vision of our high school program had to be adjusted, because like most high school kids, when you look at, I saw our high school program through high school kid eyes. And so when I graduated from high school, I thought that my vision of what LP was what it was supposed to be. And so I was very aggressive when I was thinking about this is what the high school band has to be. In thinking back now, I learned about responsibility. I learned about how to prepare music. I learned about great literature and what it feels like to play in a great ensemble. I learned what it feels like to be in a group that is bound together by performance and just the pride in what you're doing. And those are the things that I think were the strongest things that came with me. I learned a lot about literature from both Iso and Pontius, and from two different directions, like as I said before. So those are the things that went with me most. When I had to adjust, though. I mentioned that I was aggressive when I was in college at Illinois State, I student taught with a guy named Bruce Hammett. And Bruce was the band director at a little town, Fairbury Cropsey. Well, it was the town was Fairbury, but the school was Fairbury Cropsey. And one of the things that Bruce did for me, I still, when I started student teaching, I still had this vision of what a high school band program should be. And it was my ideal version of what LP was. And that included me just pounding away anything that was not like I wanted it to be. And Bruce tempered that for me and started to help me to think a different way. We had long conversations sitting and listening to band rehearsal or band recordings at night and having a beer or two. But I remember specifically one time he looked at me and he said, "Greg, okay, so you're going to have your band camp. And one of your students comes to you and says, I have to miss Friday and Saturday of band camp because I'm going to the 4-H fair. What are you going to do?" And my immediate reaction as a just about to graduate college kid was, I'm throwing him out of band. He doesn't care enough to be here. He doesn't deserve to be in the band with me. Doesn't deserve to be in the band with all these kids who are going to be there. I came up with all those, but the bottom line was I was just going to lop his head off. And Bruce said, "Oh, okay. Now, when he goes to the 4-H fair, he's going to be showing his cows. When he graduates high school, he's going to be a farmer. And his whole life is going to be surrounded with or focused on growing cattle. That will be his livelihood. That will be his life. Is what he's going to dedicate himself to. So because he's going to go to this 4-H fair for 2 days, which is a projection of what he's going to do with his life. You're going to take music away from him for the rest of his high school career and perhaps the rest of his life." And I just sat back and went, okay, I need to rethink all this stuff. And so Bruce really tempered what I took with me I think maybe many of us when we're young are full of that same kind of energy that is, it's like an on-off switch. You're not here, I throw you out, instead of looking at the bigger picture. So
I like to call those the fallacies of methods classes.
Right.
I mean, there's the idealistic way to do it, and then there's real life, and sometimes they just don't correlate. You know what I'm saying?
I told I teach a marching band techniques class at DePaul every other year. And we had we're doing it online this year. And so we were on Zoom and I was talking to the kids and we're sort of towards the end. So we're talking a lot of philosophy that way. And that specifically came up. I just said, I remember students in college who were brilliant students. They were the A+ kids. Like all of the teachers just went, they're so good and so smart. And what those students were good at was writing down the exact book answer that they were guided to by the professor. The problem was when those same students got out into the trenches and they were confronted with a problem, they applied the book answer to the problem. And when it didn't work, they didn't know what to do because they knew they were right. They knew they had the right book answer, but the world was telling them that's not the right answer. That's not a workable answer. And so for guys like me who, were not quite as book answer savvy, you get confronted with a problem and you come up with an answer that doesn't work. You come up with another answer, and then you come up with yet another answer, and then finally you come to the right answer, or a workable answer. I know that that's a right answer, but it's workable.
Yeah. So give us a quick rundown from when you graduate high school. You say you go to Illinois State, and take us through that point to when you end up at Marian Catholic.
Okay. I went to Illinois State.
Are you pouring yourself a cocktail right now at 9 o'clock in the morning, or is that coffee?
It is coffee.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I want our listeners to know, because I go like, man, he's going to start slurring his words here in a minute.
Anybody knows me knows it's coffee. I know, Greg. I'm a full day coffee drinker. I chose ISU. Back then, times were very, very different. You didn't get the same counseling situation that you get now, and you didn't get the same. It was not built the same way. I'm sure you remember, but I chose Illinois State because the band director at the time, George Fuller, just came to LaSalle, Peru, on a day and just wanted to listen to kids play. I hadn't prepared an audition or anything like that. I was working on a sonata by Flor Peters or something like that. And so Mr. Izzo just had him listen to individual kids. I went into a practice room and played what I was working on for him, and he offered me a scholarship to ISU. So I went to ISU. I didn't consider anything else, just that. I went there for 4 years. And as I mentioned, I had a great student teaching experience that really changed a lot about the way I looked at all things band, and kind of set me up. LaSalle, Peru, back then, this is pre the big marching band swing that happened in the late 70s. I graduated in 1970. And so I didn't have a background in competitive marching in any stretch. They wanted to build a drum corps back in my high school days. They wanted to build a drum corps between Ottawa and LaSalle, Peru, and they could have built a monster. We had some of the trumpet players that were there. Like when I was in high school, one of the trumpet players that was with me there is the trumpet professor at the University of Northern Iowa. The other school is Ottawa, Illinois, and there's a jazz player named Johnny Kinnison that came from there. Johnny Carroll is a professional trumpet player in Texas. Steve Hawk is a professional player and college professor with trumpet. And I mean, we just had some serious brass players. But the two directors, Mr. Izzo from LP and Ray McKeever from Ottawa. Ray was a great band director. The two of them pretty much put the kibosh to any chance of having a drum corps. Of course, back then, drum corps was not at all what it is today. But anyway, I went to ISU and got turned around really well at my student teaching experience. I ended up teaching in a little town called Little York. Well, the school was called Yorkwood, and it's way out on the other side of the state. If you go to Galesburg, Illinois, and then drive another 30 miles, you get to Monmouth. If you drive another 15 miles out into the country towards the Mississippi, you'll get to where Little York is. I lived above a feed store for 2 years, and had a great experience. You know, I was a young teacher, and so I still had, just like every young teacher, a boatload to learn, and it was a great place to learn. So I was there for 2 years. The band was doing pretty well for what we had and where we were. And I got a phone call from Western Illinois. Mr. Izzo, my high school band director, had moved to Western Illinois, and he called and said he'd like me to come down or at least consider to come down and do a graduate assistantship. And I jumped on the chance because all the while that I was at ISU, Mr. Izzo was at Western. And I watched from a distance at the great things that he was doing at Western and what the program felt like there. Essentially, he had taken the way that the LaSalle Peru High School band felt about its band program, and he'd taken that and built the same kind of thing at Western Illinois, where everybody was really proud to be there and great things were happening. And so I went there and spent a year working with him and Robert Morsch, who did bands and jazz band and marching band at Western. Towards the end of that year, finishing up my graduate degree, I got a phone call from a friend who lived up here in Chicago Heights, and he was working in the parochial grade school bands. It's all fee-based program for him. And he called and just said, "Hey, Greg, there's a band opening up here at Marian Catholic High School." And he said, "There's not much there, but you might be able to build something here." And so I looked into it. I applied for the job. When I came up, I actually came to the job interview with Mr. Izzo, who knew the band or knew the person who was the big supporter of the band program. There was a music company here in Chicago Heights called Musart Music, run by a guy who was a former professional jazz saxophone player that Mr. Izzo knew. His name was Dean Sayre. And so Mr. Izzo brought me to Chicago Heights, picked up Dean Sayre, and the three of us walked in for my interview at Marian. So it was sort of like, I had these two big bodyguards, walking in with me when I took the interview. What's funny though is the interview was done with the principal, who knew who these guys were, and but the main interview was done by a sister who had started the band program years before. Her name was Sister Marian Claire, and she was a little and quite frail person by the time I met her. And it was obvious from the first time she spoke, and we talked back and forth a little bit, that Dean Sayre or Chris Izzo or the Pope himself was not going to intimidate her as far as that band program. She was the ruler of the band universe at Marian Catholic High School. What I didn't know is she was fatally ill at the time. She was very, very sick. And she hired me, and she passed a couple of weeks later. But I at least got a chance to meet her and talk with her. And I was inspired by how much she cared for the program. And so I was offered the job, and I'm still here.
So you get the job, and then all of a sudden, you walk in, you face reality. And so talk to me about that very first day walking in the Marian Catholic Band room, and what are your memories of what the hell was going through your mind then?
Well, on a personal side, I was just realizing, which I realized when I first started teaching, that I didn't know a doggone thing. I mean, you pick up stuff along the way that I've learned to access later, but the real truth is, as a new teacher, if you think you know anything, you've made a mistake. So I wasn't making that mistake. I just knew that I just had a lot to learn to make all this work. The band itself was it was small. There were two bands here at the time. One was it's still called the Symphonic Band, and it had probably 50 kids. And that was also our marching band. And then there was a second group that was mostly freshmen. And then some of the upperclassmen could sign for a second band class and play a secondary instrument. But essentially there were right around 70 total kids in the program. And there were a couple of good players, that had developed along the way. And probably, there were a handful of kids who really wanted the band to be good. Like they were sort of on the band team, not the Bimm team, but the band team right away. There were a number of them who were not at all on the band or the Bimm team at all. They not necessarily good players. They were just there to kind of pass the time. And so they didn't, as a band, they didn't play very well. And so we had tons to work on. And in one of the issues with that too was I didn't have a full set of tools to work with. I was still, it was my third year teaching at the high school level. And so I just had to find my way through things. Luckily, the kids that cared a lot were on the team right away and worked pretty hard. And we got a couple of things that the switches got flipped that really helped us out. We after my first year at Marian, my first year was to teach those two band classes. There were 6 periods in a day, so I taught 2 band classes and 3 introduction to music classes. Which at Marian, when you came in as a freshman back then, you could choose to be in band for the entire year, or you could have 1 semester of introduction to music and 1 semester of PE. Those were the only 2 choices. The problem with the introduction to music class is every freshman that wasn't in band had to be in one of those classes. And so they were full of kids who didn't want to be there. And so they were an interesting struggle to try to motivate the kids to want to learn anything at all about music. On the band side of things, we got a switch flipped very quickly. After that first year, the school changed its schedule to a 7-period day. And 1 period was meant to be a study hall for everyone. Like everybody had to have a study hall. And so that gave me two things that I worked with, and the principal just allowed me to move forward with this. They did two things to help. I could write passes for any student who wanted to come down and practice during their study hall time. So I had access to the kids as they were practicing, and they had time, convenient time that they could practice. And it was something that they wanted to do because that was way better than sitting in a boring study hall. So I had kids who could come down and practice. But the bigger thing was the school, at my request, decided that they were going to take the second band and schedule all of their study halls into the period of the first band. The top band met fifth hour. And so they took all of the kids who were in the second band and put their study hall fifth hour. What that meant was I had flexibility. Anybody in the second band that played well enough and could move up, they could move up into the top band. And during marching season, I could march everybody because I could meet them together. All I did was give the study hall back. It was actually, I think, fifth and sixth hour at that time. Like the top band met fifth hour, the second band met sixth hour, but the second band had study hall fifth. So all I did was flip back and forth. So essentially what happened, and we had almost no dropout rate. I think I only lost one student to drop out my first year. Her name was Beth. I won't give you her last name just because this is out in the open, but her name
don't like put her email address or phone number. Don't give that, Greg.
And she was a clarinet player, and I can remember the conversation we had. But she was the only one that dropped, and so the band went essentially in the eyes of the community from 50 kids, and because they only see the marching band. They saw 50 kids in the marching band one year. The very next year, they saw 90 kids in the marching band. And all of a sudden, everybody's going like, hey, what's going on with the band? They're way better than they used to be. Well, part of it was study halls. Part of it was being able to just get a more critical mass out on the field. And so that started the pendulum to swing towards having a lot more energy in the program.
It's amazing. All the successes you've had throughout your career, all the wonderful things you've done, and you still remember the name of the kid that dropped your first year at Marian. I mean, you think us band directors are a weird breed? I mean, that we just like hang on to that stuff and we take it so personally that we want everybody there.
After 44 years, that has not changed an iota. I don't take it as a personal affront like that the person is saying they hate me or something like that, but I take it as a personal loss.
Yeah.
I realized that the student who leaves band no longer has those opportunities. They no longer will get to be a part of a group like that. No longer will they get to share music like that. And I don't get to share music with them. And, to me, that's a huge loss. And in some cases it's absolutely necessary. There is no other answer. But in many cases, it's just a frivolous decision that doesn't have to get made, but
Well, Greg, I remember hearing about you from a mutual friend and colleague, Ward Durrett, and you know Ward really well. And at that time, he was working for McCormick's Enterprises as a salesman, and he was also your percussion instructor. I was teaching at Winnetonka High School in North Kansas City. I think I was in my second year of teaching, and he had sold me an old set of orange Vistalite marching band drums.
I remember those things
that the Guardsmen Drum and Bugle Corps had. And in fact, he said, if you'll buy these drums, I'll give you a set of marching timpani. And they were the old crank timpani that the Kilties had. He says, all you have to do is pay shipping, So I got all this crap, and I'm a trumpet player. And it's like, I said, okay, Ward, the only way I'm going to buy this stuff is if you'll come and teach the kids. And he goes like, well, okay. So he traveled to Kansas City and taught my drumline for 8 years. And every time he'd come by, he talked about this young guy that was at Marian Catholic. And he said, man, you got to meet this guy. He said, you guys are, he said, you're kindred spirits. So talk about when you first met Ward and what the Marian band was going through at those times.
We were just still trying to figure things out. We had been pretty lucky with the growth side of things. The concert band was getting to be pretty strong by then. But I met Ward. Actually, it was at a contest. There was a high school band program up here. Plainfield High School is now split, and there are numerous high schools. But back then, there was one Plainfield High School, and the band director was a guy named Ed Jones, who was, kind of iconic up here for sure, and a wonderful director. And he, every year, Plainfield would either host the organization contest for IHSA or the solo and ensemble contest. And this particular year was solo and ensemble contest. And I was in the parking lot. I was one of the last guys to leave after that thing. And so I picked up our score sheets for all of the soloists and ensembles and stuff, and was getting, out of my car, getting ready to go home. And I heard somebody call my name. I looked over, and it was Ward, a very tall Ward Durrett. And he just said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And we talked a little bit, and he said, I really am impressed with what's going on with your percussionists and stuff. I really would like to be able to work with your drum line. And my answer was, I would love that, except we don't have any money. And he said, if you'll pay for my gas and buy me a burrito each time I come down. There was this place called the Big Burrito or something like that on Halstead.
You mean it wasn't Taco John's?
No, Taco John's is too far away.
Oh, okay.
We would have been there if given a chance. But and so for the at the beginning of his time, it was just, I would pay gas, and he drove a little sporty Honda, if I remember. And we'd go out for a burrito after he'd run a percussion sectional, and we got to be very close friends. And it got to be obviously a real, like with position with actually you get paid to do what you're doing. But during that time, he brought all kinds of percussion things to my attention. He was we would write our show and taught the kids, and was just an incredible asset. When I first started at Marian, I taught everything, including the color guard. And I had gotten to the point where we hired a grade school person who was a color guard person, who was back then Carrie Fund. She's now Carrie Zimney, who I'd known from college, and she did our color guard. So there were two of us, and then Ward was there pretty much immediately with that, and so there were three of us on the quote team. But Ward became a real important part of that. He wrote for the drums, and his writing was not the techno drum stuff that everybody writes. It wasn't like how many notes can I get in, and how many different pataflaflas or whatever kind of things they do can I get in. His writing was very much he is a really fine jazz drummer, and his writing was very much like that of a really fine jazz drummer. The band always knew where time was, and whenever the band needed to get set up so they could play a really powerful attack, that setup happened just as perfectly as a good jazz drummer would do. And so he helped us to play well outside. His writing helped us to play well outside, and we became really, really close friends. He was exactly the kind of person that I wanted working with the kids from a philosophic standpoint. And so I do remember that he would talk to me about Winnetonka, and when he'd come up, he'd tell me he'd been down there and stuff. And one specific thing that I remember is he had a T-shirt that was from some place that it was like a restaurant that sold chickens.
Stroud's Chicken.
We choke our own chickens.
That's what it says on the back of it. That's right. Stroud's Chicken. It's still there, and it's the greatest pan-fried chicken you've ever had in your life.
Well, he had this big T-shirt that just said whatever the name was, but it says "We choke our own chickens," and that was, I don't know what that is, 40 years ago, and I can still remember the T-shirt.
Oh man, not a good thing to wear around a bunch of high school kids. I also remember around that time, you brought your band to the Bands of America Summer Grand Nationals in Whitewater, and you were the lab band for Bob Buckner and his staff, and he worked with your students for a week, and you did an exhibition at the finals on Saturday night, and it was just so awesome to watch that whole process. How did you get involved with that idea, and what did that 1 week with Buckner and his staff and that being put in the spotlight in that laboratory setting, how did that help Marian Catholic evolve over the years?
Well, if we back up a little bit, we started competing actually in the summers 2 years before that. 2 years, I think, 2 years before that. There were a couple of contests that happened that were lead ups to summer nationals in our area.
That whole Midwest circuit kind of thing.
Yeah. And the first year we went to one weekend, and the thing that sold me on that weekend was it was two field shows. One, it was a Rock Falls contest, but there was also a field show in polo on a Friday night. Mm-hmm. And so there was a polo contest. Then on Saturday, you'd do a parade, do a concert band thing, and then do a field show. And so we went to Rock Falls that first year. And then the following year, we stretched a little bit more, went to Rock Falls Polo, Chesterton, and Herscher in the weeks leading, or the week leading up to Summer Nationals, or the week before Summer Nationals. But we still hadn't gone to Summer Nationals at all. And so it was for the summer of 1981. And I got a phone call from Larry McCormick, and he asked if we would consider bringing the band up as a clinic band. And since we were already going out and competing, and and in truth, the band was getting pretty good by then. Not super good, but we were being successful. And so I talked to the kids about whether they could stay on for one more week and then go up and do the Summer Nationals. And all of them, all of them couldn't say yes, but enough of them so we could field a significant sized band a workable sized band, said they could stay. And, so we said yes. And what happened was, I made a lifelong friendship with Bob Buckner, which I still cherish. That by itself made it worth, or made me glad that I did say yes. But the kids got a chance to experience a different level of stuff and a different level of excitement, because there were bands from all over that year, every year, and they got to see some really high level performing bands and change the way they looked at stuff. They also got a week to work with some absolutely amazingly talented people. If I remember the color guard, I think it was Julie Gilbert that did the color guard for Bob. And obviously Bob, LJ Hancock was involved, and he was also a lifelong friend. And Fred Sanford was involved with the percussion. And so I'm like, how do you go wrong? We got Bob Buckner and LJ Hancock and Julie Gilbert and Fred Sanford. But the kids learned I think they got to experience a different way of looking at things outside of our little Marian world. And some of them, I don't know that they registered with the kids the same way they did with me, but we were playing Tiger of San Pedro was the concert tune that Bob had selected. And we were working on it in one of the gyms up there, and it just didn't feel quite right. Or at least especially to those guys. And so I remember specifically Fred Sanford just said, let's go back to, and he gave some letter or number, whatever it was. And he went back and he told the drums not to play, and he picked up a tambourine and he drove the band with the tambourine and just laid a groove that fixed everything. And I'm just going like, okay, I'm just a little peon here. We got, he was just an amazing, amazing musician. And it changed, being able to experience that for me changed me, just because you could see incredibly high levels of musicianship and thought and proficiency at things like that. For the kids, they knew that they were in the working with wonderful, great people. And then also being in the spotlight helped them to feel strong about themselves too. And so from then on, we started competing at Summer Nationals. Their first year as a competitor was 82.
Wow. Well, as I've watched, your program over the years, you've really been one that's kind of helped us all stretch our envelopes, if I can use that term, to see what can be done, with an ensemble, a marching band. So when in your career did you decide it was going to be okay to break the traditional barriers of programming and start taking some risks?
Well, there are two parts to that. One was how I started to score, because I've been arranging for the band since '84, and one of the things that allowed us to play the stuff that we played was an extended use of woodwinds, not just, woodwinds nowadays. I'm going to go ahead and say that many groups nowadays, in order to say that they have woodwinds, will just trot the woodwinds up to the front of the field and have them play a whole bunch of fast notes, very often just a bunch of diatonic runs that, are just to show off that they're there. And then they run back, and then the brass are the ones who carry the load. Back then, we made a change, and I loved the change because it allowed us to play things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to play, and in such a way that we wouldn't be able to play. But I remember specifically learning about woodwinds, the power of woodwinds. We were playing, this was not my arrangement. It was an arrangement by a guy named Pete Spadero, who used to arrange for LJ.
Yeah.
And it was Spanish Fantasy after the
Chicoria.
Yeah. And we had this one run that was in the middle of stuff, and it was a tragic mess in our rehearsal. And I started to get angry. And so I remember I got mad at the mellophone players and said, "Don't play mellophone, just put your horns down. I don't want to hear you anymore." And so they put their horns down. And what happened when we got to that spot is all of that was doubled with clarinets and flutes and saxophones. And this incredible woodwind sound came out. And I was like, oh, that's, it opened the door for how I could use woodwinds and how powerful woodwinds could be in and of themselves. And so that sort of changed what was possible. The second part was from a philosophic standpoint. As I started to do our arrangements and work towards building the shows, I just explored an awful lot of music. I used to go and spend hours in the library at Governor State University, because they had a big score library, and just look. And back then you couldn't just go on the internet and punch something up on YouTube and hear tunes. You had to go and use your eyes and ears and invest in CDs and all kinds of stuff. And so I spent a lot of time looking. But one of the things that I think changed my perspective was the cadets back then, when they, in '82, when they did the Copland stuff, the Cuban Overture and Concerto in F. That was a very different way of looking at things. And then the next year they did the Bernstein Mass, while they had done Rocky Point Holiday both of those times. And then the next year they did West Side Story. But then especially the following year when they did Profanation, it was sort of like an eye-opening kind of experience, just because Profanation doesn't fit the old models at all. It was sophisticated, and you had to think to be able to stay with it, and it wasn't simplistic at all, and it felt to me like a pursuit of art. And so it really opened the doors in my mind for what we could play, and so real Stravinsky became more of a thing, or more of a possibility. We did Petrushka the very next year, and so there was an inspiration from that side, and that inspiration is obviously the staff at the cadets at the time with Michael Cesario was a big part of that, and Zingali, and then you can't underestimate the contribution of Jim Prime. Those guys were just making all kinds of great progress, and so that sort of turned me in that direction. But being able to use woodwinds was a big part of the direction that we got to choose. And it became a thing back in the middle '80s. That was a very important part of marching band was the band is supposed to sound like a concert band. Like it's not supposed to sound like a brass band with a few adjunct woodwinds. And that was really important. And it was highly, highly rewarded by judges at the time. You know, if you played something that had a magnificent full concert band sound, everybody recognized how special that was.
Yeah, your buddy Tim Salzman at Herscher was doing that during those days also. I mean,
absolutely. His band in 1982 was a big part of that for me too. We were starting to understand that, but they did a Dvorak thing, and what was the Beatles tune that they played? Eleanor Rigby, I think, was their concert tune, and they played Copland's Tenderland at the end of the show, if I remember right. And Tim really used woodwinds in an extraordinary way at that time. I remember specifically that it was a great sound, and that was an inspiration too.
Yeah. Well, you've experienced great success over the years in the marching arena with many national and state titles to your credit. And we're going to talk more way beyond marching band here in a couple minutes. But I got the distinct feeling that as great as it is to win a contest or to win a title, that's not the motivating factor for Greg Bimm or your students. So what is it that motivates Greg Bimm, and why, after all of these years, are you continuing to work so hard at marching band with what's become really a young person's activity?
Yeah, I could use younger legs for sure. The winning a contest has never been the choice for us, or the goal, and that was a specific choice that I made a long time ago. I had to go back to the beginning of that. I had friends who were all about winning the trophy. Specifically, I remember the story that I've told many times. In 1984 was the first time we won Summer Nationals. And that was on a Saturday night. We came home on Sunday, and Sunday evening, my phone rang, and I won't tell you who the person was, but he was a very, very successful band director, or had been at that time, a very successful band director in Illinois. And one of his personal goals, they had won, Illinois stuff, consistently. And that was the driving factor was, but his question to me was, now that you've won the big one, what are you going to do next? And my answer was, I'm going to teach some lessons tomorrow. Basically I'm going back to Marian tomorrow, and we just continue. But the message was clear that if the goal is to win a contest, there are so many things wrong. What happens when you do? What's next? You have to win it again and again and again and again. And at some point, you're not going to win, And so that seems like the wrong path. And even more so, you could be the best band that you have ever been. Like every student in your band could be just smoking good, and you could still not win. And so if winning is the only reward or the only goal, you're setting yourself up for a huge failure. And so we have always, no matter what we've done, we have always lived by that and preached that. When we've won Grand Nationals, often I've told the kids, guys, you are no better right now than you were 2 hours ago. You are still the same that you were. Your show, if there were flaws, they're still the same flaws. They didn't all of a sudden go away. So don't start thinking that, you should feel happy that the judges felt like they, like you had done a good job today, but that's pretty much it. And you can't put all of your eggs in that basket on either side. Yep. If you go in and you don't win, you finish somewhere else or finish lower than you thought you should, that still shouldn't be it. It should still be The goal is to do the best you can do. And we preach that to the kids, but it's an important thing. And a couple of years ago, I have to be before the couple of years ago story. I've always thought it's easy to be a good sport when you're winning. It's easy to be gracious. If you win Grand Nationals 3 times in a row, it's a pretty comfortable place to stand. When you don't, it makes it a little bit more difficult. And so the philosophy about we don't have to win, like we're not here to win, we are here to just be as good as we can be. That philosophy has been taught, but there's a test that happened. A couple of years ago, I was doing a clinic out in Las Vegas, and Mike Colburn from Butler was doing one of the bands, and we were riding somewhere, maybe to the airport or something, I don't know, but we were talking and talking about the subject turned to that kind of stuff. And I said, the real test will come. And the real test for Marian will be what happens when we don't make finals at Grand Nationals. And because that's the real test. When you say we're here to do our best, whatever that is, that's what we get. And we can still go on and we can still pursue greatness and pursue excellence after that. And at that point, we had never not made finals. In truth, it was only about a year later, I think, that we didn't make finals at Nationals, which was a very strange feeling for me. I think we made finals 34 times in a row or something like that. And so the big thing that I remember driving back to the school where the band was staying, and they were all waiting for me to get there to talk to them, thinking about what I was going to say and realizing that this was the real test. This was, and so I spoke the same way as always. And, shortly after we were done and the kids were relaxing, they were eating pizza and just being kids. And so I felt very successful that night because the philosophy seemed to have stayed true, under the extreme circumstances, under extreme testing. The band's philosophy came through. We didn't have to win. We didn't have to make finals. We didn't, we could still be a great ensemble, a great organization, just by trying to do our best and trying to pursue excellence as strongly as possible.
One last question about marching band. Then we're going to talk about the other part of your program, which so many people don't get a chance to see, and that's the incredible concert band program you have at Marian. So here goes this last question. It just seems like today, there are high schools around the nation that are spending more money than it's just almost obscene amounts of money, upwards of $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year to field a marching band. They do a competition marching band show, and they're buying their drill and their music and their instructors and their travel and their props and their trucks and probably 747s and everything possible. And I know that Marian Catholic does not spend that kind of money. They don't have that kind of money. They don't have that kind of capacity to do that. You probably could find a way to do it if you wanted to, but I don't think that's part of your DNA. But you still field an incredible product. And so my question, though, is at what point does the amount of money that some groups are spending simply become too much and that the ends just can't justify the means? I'll bring you Greg's answer to my question about the amount of money marching bands are spending and if the ends can justify the means in our next podcast. Well, I know there's a lot to unpack in part 1 of this conversation, and there's going to be a whole bunch more in part 2. If you haven't picked up on anything else so far, I hope you've picked up on the passion that Greg brings to his work, and you're going to hear much more about it in our second installment. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. I'll be back with the second half of my interview with Greg Bimm next week. And as always, please tell your friends and colleagues about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So until the next time, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.